Karen always felt it was her duty to monitor the neighborhood. However, her obsession with one specific house had escalated beyond mere curiosity. Since the black homeowner moved in, she was convinced he didn't belong. In Karen's mind, there was no way he could afford such a nice house without being involved in something shady. She had no proof. She didn't need any. Her own prejudice was enough. Initially, she just watched from behind her curtains, tracking his every move with suspicion. His routine quickly became predictable. When he left for work, when he returned, when the house was empty. And with that knowledge came an opportunity. She just needed something, anything, that would justify her suspicions. Something she could report. So one day, after watching him drive off, she made her move. A quick glance over her shoulder to make sure no one was looking, and she strode right up to his front door. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key she had no right to have. Whether she had stolen it, copied it, or gotten it through some other means didn't matter. She slid it into the lock. A quiet click. And just like that, she was inside. Her heart raced. Not from fear, but from excitement. She was certain she was about to uncover something big. She started in the living room, running her fingers over the coffee table, lifting papers, looking for anything that seemed off. When nothing stood out, she moved to the kitchen. Cabinets, drawers, even the fridge. She checked it all. She wasn't sure what she was searching for, but in her mind, something had to be there. She snapped photos of anything that caught her attention. Bills on the counter, a set of keys by the door, a laptop sitting on a desk. If she couldn't find real evidence of wrongdoing, maybe she could create the illusion of it. She even sifted through his mail, her fingers trembling with anticipation. Bank statements, utility bills, normal, everyday things. But to Karen, his very presence was suspicious enough. After several minutes, she realized she needed to leave before he got back. She carefully put everything back, at least as close as she could remember, and slipped out the door, locking it behind her. But she wasn't done. If she hadn't found anything this time, she would just have to come back. And so Karen's secret mission continued. Every time the house was empty, she found an excuse to slip inside. Each visit, she dug deeper, convinced that the truth would eventually reveal itself. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't as careful as she thought. And soon, the man she had been spying on began to notice something was wrong. At first, it was just a feeling, a nagging suspicion that something was off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but every time he came home, something seemed different. Nothing major, just little things. A drawer left slightly open when he was sure he had closed it. Papers on his desk slightly out of place. His keys sitting somewhere different from where he usually left them. He told himself it was nothing, just his imagination playing tricks on him. Maybe he had been in a rush and forgotten where he put things. Maybe he had left a cabinet open without realizing it. But as the days went by, that nagging feeling only got worse. Then one evening, as he sat down to go through his mail, something caught his attention. The envelopes were not where he had left them. He remembered exactly how he had arranged them the previous night, but now they were slightly out of place, just enough to make his stomach knot. A shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't just his imagination. Something was definitely off. That's when he decided he needed evidence. If someone was tampering with his belongings, he had to catch them in the act. The next day, he purchased a small security camera. Nothing extravagant, just a discreet device he could place near the front door, aimed at the entryway. If someone was entering while he was away, he was going to find out who. That night he set it up, ensuring it was recording. Then he went about his routine as usual. The next morning, he left for work, like always. But this time, when he returned home, he had footage to review. His heart raced as he pulled up the video on his phone and pressed play. And there she was, clear as day. Karen, his neighbor. The same woman who always seemed to be watching. The one who barely spoke to him, but always made him feel unwelcome. He watched, his jaw clenching, as she walked up to his front door, calm, deliberate. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a key. His key. Without hesitation, she unlocked the door and stepped inside as if she owned the place. His stomach churned with anger. How long had this been happening? How many times had she trespassed, rummaging through his things? And more importantly, how had she obtained a key? He didn't know how she had managed it, but one thing was certain: this was the last time. The next morning, before heading to work, he drove straight to the hardware store. A brand new lock, a completely different key. By the time he left the house that day, the old lock was gone, replaced with something Karen would never have access to. But what he didn't anticipate was her reaction. And he certainly didn't expect that her own dark secret was about to be revealed. The crisp morning air bit at his skin as he knelt by his front door, carefully installing the new lock. He worked methodically, tightening the last screw, testing the key to ensure everything was secure. It was a simple task, something every homeowner had the right to do. But Karen had other plans. From behind her blinds, she had been watching him. The moment she realized what he was doing, anger flared inside her. Without a second thought, she stormed out of her house, her slippers smacking against the pavement as she charged toward his porch. Her face was flushed, her breathing heavy, and as soon as she reached him, she planted herself in front of his door, arms crossed. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. The man barely glanced up from his work. "Changing my lock," he said, his tone calm, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. Karen scoffed. "Why? What are you hiding?" This time, he stood up, dusting off his hands before facing her. "Excuse me." She pointed sharply at the door. "I saw you. You changed the locks without telling anyone. Why would you do that? Unless, of course, you're trying to keep people from discovering what you're really up to." He chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "Karen, this is my house. I don't need to inform anyone when I change my own locks." But she wasn't listening. Her mind had already twisted the situation into something it wasn't. In her warped logic, a black man securing his home could only mean one thing: he had something to hide. "This is suspicious behavior," she declared, pulling out her phone. "I don't know what you're planning, but I won't let you bring crime into this neighborhood." The man folded his arms, watching as she frantically dialed 911. He had dealt with her passive-aggressive nonsense before, but this was something else entirely. She was actually calling the police on him for changing his own locks. "Yes, hello," she said, her voice dripping with fake urgency. "There's a suspicious black man breaking into a house on my street. I think he's up to something dangerous. You need to send someone right away." Then she glanced at him and smirked as if she had already won. But the homeowner remained calm. He had a feeling she might try something like this, which was why he was prepared. He leaned casually against the doorframe, waiting. Karen had no idea she had just sealed her own fate. The distant wail of sirens shattered the quiet neighborhood as a squad car rounded the corner, lights flashing. Within moments, the vehicle screeched to a halt in front of the house. Two officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters, their eyes scanning the scene with sharp precision. Karen rushed toward the officers, her voice high-pitched with exaggerated distress. "Officers, thank God you're here. I caught him in the act." She pointed an accusing finger at the black homeowner. "He was messing with the lock, probably trying to break in." The officers turned their attention to the man who stood calmly with his arms crossed. Unlike Karen, he wasn't frantic. He wasn't scrambling for excuses. He was simply waiting for his turn to speak. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a skeptical look, narrowed his eyes. "Sir, can you explain what's going on?" The homeowner nodded, his voice steady. "Yeah, I live here. I was changing my locks because someone has been coming into my house without permission." Karen gasped, clutching her chest as if she had just heard the most outrageous thing ever. "That's absurd! Who would do something like that?" The man locked eyes with her, his face unreadable. "I have security footage showing someone breaking in multiple times. Care to guess who it might be?" Karen's confident look wavered for a split second before she quickly regained her composure. "Lies! He's fabricating this because he knows he's been caught." The officer sighed, rubbing his temple in frustration. "Sir, can you prove that you live here?" Without hesitation, the man pulled out his ID and an envelope from the mailbox, both displaying his name and address. The officer examined the documents before turning back to Karen. "And you're claiming he was breaking in?" "Yes," she insisted, her voice rising. "I saw it with my own eyes. He was changing the locks right in front of me." The second officer, a no-nonsense woman, raised an eyebrow. "Changing his own locks?" Karen hesitated, realizing too late how absurd she sounded. "Well, yes, but why would he need to do that unless he had something to hide?" The first officer exhaled sharply, clearly fed up with the situation. "Ma'am, changing your own locks isn't a crime." Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red. But... The homeowner allowed a small smile to form at the corner of his lips. "Maybe you should ask her why she's so upset about it. Why does she care so much that I changed my locks? Unless, of course, she was the one sneaking into my house." The officers exchanged glances. That was an interesting detail. The man crossed his arms. "I have security footage. It shows someone entering my home without permission. And unless there's another blonde woman in this neighborhood who wears those exact slippers." His eyes flicked downward. "I think we all know who it was." Karen stumbled back, her face pale. "This is madness! He's framing me!" Karen's voice quivered with anger. The second officer reached for her radio. "Dispatch, can you run a check for me? Name's Karen Mitchell. Any priors?" Karen's breath caught. "Wait, what are you doing?" A burst of static crackled through the radio before the response came. "Confirmed. Karen Mitchell is currently on probation for theft and trespassing." Silence enveloped the group like a heavy blanket. The first officer turned back to Karen, his hand resting firmly on his cuffs. "Ma'am, are you aware that violating probation is a serious offense?" Karen's head shook frantically, her words spilling out in desperation. "No, no, no! You don't understand! He must have set me up!" "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood," she pleaded. The second officer stepped forward, voice firm. "Ma'am, turn around!" The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Karen let out a shriek. "This isn't right! He's the criminal, not me!" But the black homeowner stood still, arms crossed, watching as the officers led her away. For once, justice had found its mark. The street was thick with tension. Karen had just finished her tirade, practically foaming at the mouth as she demanded the police arrest the black homeowner, but he didn't argue, he didn't shout. Instead, he let out a slow, measured breath and pulled out his phone. "Officers," he said, voice even, "before you make any assumptions, you might want to take a look at this." A few taps on the screen, then he held it up for them to see. The first officer stepped closer, brow furrowing. The second officer, standing beside Karen, leaned in. Karen scoffed. "Oh, please, whatever he's showing you is fake." Then she saw it. A mugshot. Her mugshot. Her own face stared back at her, frozen in time, an image of shame from years ago. Beneath it, bold letters spelled it out. Karen Mitchell, theft, trespassing, burglary, currently on probation. Karen's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, then shut. But the homeowner wasn't finished. With a flick of his finger, another image appeared. A news article detailing how a woman had been caught breaking into homes, stealing valuables, selling them online. The story laid it all out. How she'd been caught red-handed, how she'd pleaded for leniency, how the judge had granted probation instead of jail. The officers stiffened. Then, one final swipe. A video. Grainy security footage. A shadowy figure creeping into his home. A figure. Moving carefully. Her face partially hidden, until she turned toward the camera. Karen. The officers didn't need to see any more. The male officer looked up, his face unreadable. "Where did you get this?" "It's public record," the homeowner said, his tone steady. "Look it up yourselves." "And the footage?" "From my house." Karen's body went rigid, her posture locked in place. "This is absurd. This is a violation of my privacy." The female officer shot her a pointed look. "Says the woman caught breaking into someone else's home." Karen's lips parted, but nothing came out. The homeowner folded his arms. "Let me get this straight. You broke into my house, got upset when I changed the locks, called the cops on me, while you're the one on probation for burglary." Karen's head jerked from side to side, her voice rising in desperation. "No! He's twisting everything! He's dangerous! You have to believe me!" But the officers weren't listening anymore. They had all the proof they needed.